In React, state lives inside whichever component owns it, and children can't reach into a sibling's state. In this lesson, we'll fix a temperature converter whose two inputs refuse to stay in sync by lifting shared state up to a common parent. By the end, you'll know exactly when and how to move state upward. We start by importing the usestate hook from React, which lets a component hold onto changing data. First, we write a plain helper that converts a Celsius value into Fahrenheit, and a matching helper that converts Fahrenheit back into Celsius. Now we define a reusable temp input component that takes a label, a value, and a change handler. It renders a label wrapping the text we pass in. Inside sits an input whose displayed value comes straight from the value prop. When the user types, we call the onChange prop with the raw text from the input. Next comes the converter itself, the parent that ties everything together. Here we declare a single piece of state, the Celsius value, starting at 0. This handler runs when the Celsius input changes, saving the number the user typed. This handler runs when the Fahrenheit input changes, converting the entry back into Celsius before storing it. Now we return the two inputs wrapped in a fragment. The first temp input is labelled Celsius and is fed the raw Celsius state. The second is labelled Fahrenheit and gets its value by converting Celsius on the fly. That closes out the converter component's return and body. Finally, we export converter as the default so it can be used elsewhere. Let's follow what happens when you type the number 25 into the Celsius box. The input fires its change event, and our handler receives the raw string that the user typed. Because this is the Celsius field, that call lands in handle Celsius up in the parent. We convert the string to a real number and store it as the single piece of state. Calling setCelsius tells React that this value changed, so it schedules the converter to render again. On that re-render, Celsius now holds 25 and both children get fresh props. The first input simply shows the new Celsius value directly. The second input asks to Fahrenheit to compute its value from that same Celsius number. So 25 degrees Celsius flows through the formula and comes out as 77 Fahrenheit. Both fields update from one keystroke even though you only touch the Celsius box. Now type into the Fahrenheit box instead and handle Fahrenheit converts your entry back down to Celsius. Every edit from either side funnels into that one state value and both inputs stay perfectly in sync. Imagine we hadn't written it this way, and instead each temperature input owned its own piece of state. The Celsius input would track its own number and the Fahrenheit input would track a completely separate one. Type 20 into Celsius and only the Celsius input's private state changes. The Fahrenheit input never hears about that edit, so it keeps showing whatever stale value it had before. That's the trap. Two views of the same underlying value, each drifting independently with no way to stay in agreement. Liftingstateup fixes this by moving that shared value out of the children and into their common parent. Now there is exactly one Celsius number and both inputs are computed from it. The children no longer remember anything themselves, they receive a value and report back changes through their callbacks. Because both inputs read from the same state, updating that one number instantly refreshes both of them together. So the rule is simple: when two components must stay in sync, lift the shared state to the closest parent they both share. Two inputs can only sync if they share one piece of state. Lift that state to the closest common parent and pass it down as props. Children become controlled, they read value from props and report changes up. If that helped, subscribe for more React.